Hi, I'm Erin Worrell, and I'm the board president of the Bayard-Rustin Center for Social Justice. I didn't want to let tonight's Power Hour open without acknowledging the bill that passed yesterday in Arkansas. The unfortunate reality is that as we celebrate Trans Visibility Week, that visibility can come with new challenges as people seek to keep us from living our fullest and most joyful lives. There can be no mistake that a law preventing trans kids and youth from getting appropriate medical care will cause immeasurable harm. And it is our hope that lawmakers across the country will reconsider taking these sorts of harmful actions. And in the meantime, know that the center is here for you, both in community and in love. And we will do everything we can and continue to work to build the beloved community that we all need. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of tonight's program.
We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.
Social justice.
Good evening to our friends on the East Coast. Good afternoon to our friends on the West, and good in-between time to our friends in the in-between spaces. Welcome, 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 welcome to the Social Justice Power Hour. Welcome to the virtual headquarters of the Bayard-Rustin Center for Social Justice. I am your host for this evening. For this first part of this evening, I'll be joined in a moment by our board president, Erin Worrell, on this wonderful Transgender Day of Visibility, which we celebrate today, and we recognize and respect all the members of our community who have come out and shared time with us on our Power Hour. We are thrilled and honored again at all the folks from the transgender community who have visited the Power Hour in the past year. So we thought today would be a perfect opportunity to raise up and amplify those voices again. Before we do, though, I do want to share with you that we are here 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific every single weeknight, as we have been since the pandemic started. Over a year shows, 300 some odd shows in all, many of them very odd indeed. And I wanted to share with you some things that are coming up. Tomorrow night we're having a really special conversation, given the last few weeks of difficulties and tragedies that our nation has faced. We're really honored to have Dave Cullen, the author of Parkland and Columbine, come by tomorrow night to talk about gun safety and gun control. Should be a really meaningful conversation, so please join us for that. And then to ease us into the weekend, we have our old friend David Brzezinski, folk musician extraordinaire, who joins us every first Folk Friday. So come out for that. And then coming up on the show later on in the month and the months ahead, Disha Thulya will be here. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. The Arsonist City, Halalan, will be with us. When Women Invented Television, Jennifer Armstrong. John Doe coming at us from last week's wonderful concert with Jill Sobule. We're going to have the Jill and John show, so stay tuned for that. Punch Me Up to the Gods. This book is going to blow up, and Brian Broom will be with us to discuss it. Obviously, every Tuesday, for those of you that have been there before, if you haven't yet, please come join us. Take a breath, both literally and figuratively, at our queer yoga that we offer every Tuesday night. Wayne Brady is coming at you all, so come for that. And finally, save the date for June 12th, Virtual Pride 21. We're going to have a great combination of a virtual platform here live June 12th, and also, hopefully, if safety and sanity allow, some in-person gatherings as well. So that's some of the things that are coming up in the Power Hour. But what we're most excited about tonight, this day, Transgender Day of Visibility, I want to welcome to our virtual stage my good friend and our Bayard-Rustin Center for Social Justice president, Erin Worrell. Erin, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hi, Robert. Thanks for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be here. I don't get to do it often enough.
We agree.
Yeah, so Trans Day of Visibility, it's an interesting little holiday. I don't know if people know the history of it. The idea was that the only big holiday, as it were, that we had was the Trans Day of Remembrance, which was and is an important day to honor and remember trans people who were taken from us in the prior year, which is always dominated by trans women of color, which is just it's something we still need to deal with, as a community, as a world. But we wanted something where we could also celebrate ourselves and say, hey, look, it's not all tragedy. There's a lot of positive and happy things that we get to do as well, and that we have. That we have a lot to contribute to the world, and we have a lot of joy to bring to the world. And so we wanted to have an opportunity to share those things as well. And that's what tonight and that's what today is about. We're going to, share a bunch of really great guests who have been here on the Power Hour over the last year and change. We've really had some great voices. We have some new voices that you maybe haven't seen before. And yeah, it's visibility comes with its own challenges. The more visible we get, the more pushback we get. But everything, you read in literature and in, just in the world says that the more people are aware of us and the more people have a chance to meet us, the more accepting people could become of us. So even though being out and being visible, inevitably invites some backlash, unfortunately the hashtags on social media always get flooded with haters, and there's a bunch of states across the country right now that are trying to keep trans kids out of sports in high school, which is just a shame. But, that's the work that the center has been here to do from the beginning. That's how Robert got started in this work. It's how the center got started in this work, was making sure that our trans youth can be visible and full participants in society and in school and in life. And so, I want to thank you for that. I want to thank everyone else that has worked with the center. I want to thank our guests for being out and visible and proud and just being there and showing people what a joy it is to get to live in the world as a trans person sometimes. So.
Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Thank you for being here tonight. And thank you for introducing these extraordinary guests that we've had over the past year. It's really important to us to raise transgender voices and folks in the community and to pass the mic both literally and figuratively. So without further ado, let's get to it. Let's see some of the wonderful folks that have visited the Power Hour this year. Thank you, my friend.
Definitely. Looking forward to this.
But then you were able to use that language and create something for yourself, but out of that for literally an entire community.
Well, that's what trans people have been doing since the beginning of time, right? Trans people are the ones who and queer people, more broadly speaking, we see, what's going down in a particular space, and we go, okay, I can take this to another level. I can make sure that this opportunity is not only great for me, but it's going to be great for other people. I feel like trans folks, queer folks, we think about, well, a lot of us, I can't speak for all of us, but a lot of us think about community in that particular way, where it is, while we want to succeed, while we want to thrive, we also want to make sure someone else thrives as well. So what good is it me having a seat at the table if I'm the only motherfucker who looks like me around it? That's not progress. That's not, that's not success. That's not thriving to me. I want the whole table to look like me, The whole table can look like me and we can have one white person in the corner. Why not that, right? For me, it's about upending all of these systems and all of these ideas that we traditionally think of, how things are supposed to go and how a particular person is supposed to act. One of the things that I love about the work that I've been able to do, particularly when I was at the LA Times, is, people, all of these celebrities, they would hear that, okay, they're going to do an interview with the LA Times. That's all they would hear. But then I would walk through the door. I don't have nails on right now. I have a little bit of a gel manicure left. But typically my nails are done. And so I come click-clacking into the interview room, and it's me that is a representative of this like legacy media brand that is the LA Times. And it's like pushing back on, for me, like this idea of like what a journalist could be or what a journalist looks like. Why can't a journalist look like me, right? Why can't someone who is on CNN or MSNBC look like me? Why do the people always have to be binary presenting? Why do they always, why do journalists always have to be so buttoned up and not have an opinion or a feeling? And all of that is contributes to and comes from these kind of ideas that we have that are all fed by white supremacy, and they're all fed by these systems that are rooted in white supremacy that really have no place of like supporting or uplifting folks who look like me. So like, why not just like set the shit on fire and shake the table a little, right? Because the system already does not support me. Or rather, it only supports me in certain ways. It only supports me in a diversity program, which diversity programs, as a product of one, I can say this, are trash. They make you do all this work for the least amount of money, but yet you're supposed to be thankful for it, right? It's all of these just like systems that aren't really support, that aren't really, making waves and making inroads for people. It's a lot of stagnation that happens as a result of these programs. And so, yeah, I mean, again, I don't remember what you asked me again. But, that's what I think of when I think of, just me moving through spaces and trans people generally moving through spaces. It's like, we're doing a lot of like forward thinking. We're doing a lot of imagination work.
Talking about the concept of being cisgender, all it describes is that you're not trans. People often like to say that, and many trans people, we all have our different perspectives, but at least in my perspective, people often say or try to say, it's kind of the I don't see color thing. They'll say, well, there's nothing different between you and a well, usually they say between you and a man, unwittingly at times implying that I am not myself a man, but rather something different. But they'll often say, oh, well, there's nothing different between you and a cis man. And I actually object to that. I think the difference is more than just, I do have a different assignment at birth. And that is the primary difference, of course. But the experience of being trans is different than the experience of being cis. In most cases, I didn't grow up with a cis male upbringing. That doesn't make me any less of a man. And it certainly doesn't mean that my perceived female upbringing made me a girl, because it did not and does not. But my experience of having been socialized female with the internal identity of a boy is completely unique to the trans experience, at least in terms of what I experience. And so I also think that it's necessary to make this definition because, there are differences, and those differences are awesome. At least from my perspective as a trans person, a lot of the things I've gotten to do and experience that could only have been because I was trans, and not even talking about any of this lawsuit stuff. I think we're wonderful. Also, there's a lot of pain that I've experienced because I'm trans that cis people might not experience, and therefore not be able to relate to. So I think that the distinction is important because trans men are men, trans women are women, and trans people are people. But a lot of us have fellowship in the fact that our experiences were different than the cis experience.
Why don't you tell our audience, for those that don't know, a little bit about the book and your journey and what it represents?
Yeah, so Fairest is a memoir. It's essentially a coming-of-age memoir about my life. I'm albino, as I mentioned, and I grew up in a rural part of the Philippines. So I'm also a Filipino first-generation immigrant. And the story tracks my life from the Philippines, from the sort of like rural farm to eventually immigrating to the United States because my maternal grandfather was here, with a child star career in between. I was a child star when I was young, and then ending up at Harvard because I was a huge nerd, and being essentially exposed and acculturated into this elite culture where I also ended up feeling like I needed to hide my race in order to feel like I belonged, right? And then, so that's the second part of the book. And then the third part of the book is how those insights into race and the illusion of race led me to also question my gender, so that eventually I transitioned. I was raised as a boy and lived my life as a young man before I transitioned and became a woman in my early 20s. And so that's basically the sort of outline of the book. And the way that I really thought about it at the time that I was writing it was I was really interested in, even though I felt a lot of industry pressure to make it, the sort of like trans memoir, just because, those are popular these days, it was really important for me to treat race and gender pretty much equally throughout the book because of the ways in which they intersect in my life, and, in my own intersectional identity. And so, the title Fairest encapsulates that, right? And in all of its, problematic racism, that there is this word in the English language that equates being white with being beautiful. And then also the kind of like the third side of the triangle is this idea of fairness in terms of justice, right? Like what is fair to ourselves and what is fair to other people? What do we, what are our obligations to ourselves and to the world? And I think this week has definitely been, for me, kind of an extension of a lot of the issues that the book raised, right? Because yes, in the context of the book, I talk about the ways in which I felt it to be necessary to be perceived as white in college, especially, 2 or 3 years after I came to the States, in order to at least have some sense of acceptance in that context. But at the same time, very few people have that privilege, right? And what did I, how did I then separate myself from people who didn't have that privilege? And then also, what are the psychological costs of doing that? And that's something that I certainly am, feeling really acutely right now. And, and it's a really, really live conversation in my head. I'm currently at my in-laws' house in New Canaan, Connecticut. I married a white man. And so increasingly, the compass, the intimate parts of my life have become really enmeshed in whiteness. And this week has really given me a lot of questions about, what it is to belong and who do I belong to and what does belonging mean and why is it important? And, and how can I, at the same time, think about belonging in the larger context of the world? Right?
Man, what a way to live, being trans, even if you're not identifying as trans openly, you're just transgender and you know it. Either you deal with it or some people can't handle it and they take their lives, So personally, I've always known, but 2012, it really just started to weigh on me, like your life is passing before you and you're not living your full truth. And I'm thinking, what will I lose? I thought about every possibility, and every possibility was worth losing just to experience who the fuck I am for a year, for 2 years. Just let me introduce myself to myself and let me see how that shit feels. Let me live my truth. Let me see how that feels. Fuck a music, fuck a record, a check. These people are living. I'm not living. I'm just breathing. I'm not alive, you know? So when you know you're transgender, you know it. There's not even a doubt, you know.
I think if you're a queer person living in the United States, your life, by the nature of our existence, is poetic. You know, every queer person is a walking poem. It's just true. You know, I grew up in the South, in Texas. You know, my mother's side is from Kentucky. My father's side is from Oklahoma. And so, you know, I came from a more conservative background. I was raised in trailer parks in Central Texas. We were dirt poor. You know, there were plenty of issues to deal with. And my gender identity at the time was not something I understood as well. And so, you know, I'm almost tearing up now because I think of, you know, all of the 12 and 14-year-olds in Central Texas who are dealing with this now, who are in the closet and have to stay there because of the environments they live in. For years of my life, I steadfastly ran away from who I was. I wanted to be the kind of person who just fit in. I was never a rebel. I was always the kid who did my homework and showed up on class on time and listened to my teachers and all that. And the reason is I wanted to just be accepted. And I knew internally that I was not someone whose authenticity would be readily accepted by the adults around me. And so instead I tried to rebel against the idea of who I was inside. And so, you know, I did every masculine rite of passage. I lifted weights. I played football in high school. I did everything I could, culturally, I would say, to kind of cleanse myself of this need to be a woman, because it was so internalized and in me that I couldn't figure out what was going on. I had no words for it. You know, when I was a teenager, at least I didn't know the word transgender. I don't think anyone around me knew the word transgender. I just knew that I wanted to be a woman, and I didn't know how to square that with my lived existence. You know, so I graduated high school, I joined the Army, and, you know, I remember being in the recruiter's office. My recruiter was like, well, you have really high test scores, and so you can do anything you want. So, you know, you should try this or that or this. And I thought, no, I want to go infantry. Because to me, going in the infantry was the most manly thing you could do. Like the U.S. Army infantry was the way to do it, because that way I would serve my country, but also I would strip this internal need of myself to be a woman. You know, I got in the Army and I realized that this is not going away. I spent 6 years in the Army, and by the time I got out, it was just abundantly clear that this craving inside of me to be a woman was permanent. No matter how much I prayed, no matter how often I went to church, no matter how much I tried to, I don't know, be a man or whatever it was, it just wasn't going to work. And I think that's something that a lot of trans people go through, is trying to calibrate these things. I have a lot of sympathy for trans people who have histories where they've gotten stuck in an environment where they can't be themselves, and so they've had to go in a different direction culturally. It's hard. It's really, really hard. So, you know, it got to the point, I want to say it was 2013, 2014, right about there, where I decided finally, you know what, I'm going to tiptoe out into, you know, the universe of queerness. I had a lot of queer friends, gay friends, lesbian, bisexual. I had a couple trans friends, not many. And I thought perhaps, as so many trans people do, is going through this process of validation. Like maybe I'm not trans. Maybe it's just, you know, even though I have this strong need to be a woman and present as a woman and have a different body than I do, I don't know, maybe there's some other box I have to check in order to be authentically trans. it's the same trap that so many trans and non-binary people fall into. It's like internal gatekeeping, right? And so I identified as non-binary for a couple of years, just to try to see if I could find a happy medium. I was in the most wonderful relationship at the time with this very lovely cis woman who was from a more conservative background like me. And when I came out to her, I told her that I think I might, want to be a woman, and I don't know what to do. And I'm scared to death telling her this. And, it was hard because I think I had fantasized that because we loved each other so much that it would be very easy to tell her, and it would be very easy for her to accept me. And that's not the way it happened. I told her that, and she was kind, but I could also see immediately etched into her face was this sense of, I can't do that. I can't be with you if that's what you are trying to become someday. And so being non-binary or gender non-conforming for those 3 years or so was my attempt to find a happy medium, my attempt to have it all. And, I think in about 2017, I realized that was just not on living, we're going to live that life. I mean, it was okay in some ways, but it was just more of a compromise. And so in late 2017, I thought, I could wait until after Trump leaves office and come out when it's safer. And I don't expect anyone else to do this, but for me, it was this matter of all these trans people have come before me, and they've had the courage and the guts to really just take the plunge and be who they are. It wasn't easy for them. I'm not saying that decision is for everyone. I'm not saying anyone should go down that path. But for me, I just thought, I guess I felt I kind of owed it to their sacrifice to also take that plunge. And I owed it to myself, of course, my own internal happiness. And for that matter, I owed it to my loved ones, the people who I care about most, to be my authentic self.
For me, I think the process of coming out and letting in never ends. It goes through a lot of stages in your life. And for me, the very first stage was having to come out to myself and understand who I am. But when I first began to understand as a teenager that there was something different about me, and I first started to tell my friends that I might be different in some way, the first thing I thought I was gay. And so I started to tell my friends that, oh yeah, I'm gay, I'm a gay man, or, gay boy. And, it wasn't quite right, but it was the only thing I knew. And so that was sort of my first form of coming out. And it wasn't until I was around 17 or 18 that I first met somebody who existed outside the gender binary. Someone who identified themselves as a cross-dresser, but who was my first glimpse into this world of there are people who don't strictly exist as who they were told they were meant to be growing up. That they didn't have, if they were told they were a boy, they didn't have to stay a boy. They didn't have to stay a girl if they were told they were a girl. And it completely changed my life. It gave me an idea of where I wanted to go, and so that's when I really came out to myself as myself. I remember driving home from that meetup and just having a whole new world open to me. And then, when I went away to college, I was able to start doing some of my own research, and that's when I found out about the opposite of coming out, especially for the trans community in the late 90s. The accepted wisdom was that you would have to do something called going stealth, which is essentially coming out, transitioning, and then going back into the closet. Because the feeling, and I believe the lived experience of a lot of trans people at that time was, well, if people know you're trans, the discrimination is too much. You'll never be able to have a life. And that thought was really painful to me. It both kept me from transitioning and kept me from telling people. I didn't want to tell my family that I was trans, because what if I then had to move away and cut ties with them? I couldn't figure out how to do that. And so, you know, after a few more years and after meeting more trans people, I came to realize that that wasn't a choice I had to make, that I could be who I am and let my loved ones in on that story and live a better life because of it. And that's really when I was able to start transitioning. But, you know, even then, I was starting grad school and dealing with all the legal documentation, and that's a constant form of coming out, because every utility and bank and government agency that you have to deal with, and, you know, dealing with the registrar at college or at the university, you know, I have to tell all of them, this is what's going on. I'm changing all my documentation. I'm changing my name. And, you know, that's kind of a fraught process. You're telling people who never would know anything about your personal life, except they have to know now. And, you know, once I finished transition, I had choices to make. I could just sort of live it quietly, let my friends know, let, you know, let things take their course when I met new people. If I wanted to tell them, if they figured it out on their own, how would I deal with it at work? And ultimately, I've decided that my life is better when I let people in. I realize I'm lucky to be in a position to do that. I have a wonderful support network of friends and family. I have a supportive job. I don't have any concerns about work or living arrangements. And so I realize that's a great privilege I have, to be as open as I am. And in some ways, I think that puts the obligation on me to let more people in, to let them see what a happy, successful trans life is. Because I think when you look at people younger than me, you look at Gen Z coming up, millennials coming up, you know, it's not a question for them anymore. They know that this is something they can do. They know that they want everything out of life. And if I can be part of helping someone see that, that's all the reason to just keep that door open and let as many people in as possible. So I'm glad to let all of you into my story.
But during this time, are you still boxing? That's my question.
I wish. So here's the thing, right? Boxing for me was like, I don't know, it was like my rock whenever I would like live in a different place. So in Berlin, you know, that was my way of like integrating, of making friends, making community. When I moved to Paris, I also boxed out there. I used to go to this gym there's like this one of the suburbs called Aubervilliers, so it's like just outside the city, and it was kind of the hood, but you know, it's like, is it really the hood? And I used to go up there and train, and I had so much fun. And then in London, I boxed out there too. And then in New York, I was trying to box, or I used to box at Gleason's, and because this is like when I just moved back to New York City, was really trying to get my footing. And, you know, I'm boxing, and then I remember I had this like one day where I got a concussion. It was really bad from sparring. And I was like, I can't write. I was like, these things might be mutually exclusive. Like, I need my brain to write, and I can't write if I'm going to get these, you know, have these potential issues. So, and it was very expensive too. I mean, you know, before Legendary, it was just like me really trying to rub two pennies together a lot of times. So, so it actually was I've been kind of on a break from that, which is a bit unfortunate, because I was even teaching trans boxing in New York for a while, because that is something I do care about, is like, you know, I think a lot of people see boxing in a certain way, that it's violent, that it's this and the other. But I actually, for me, it was always about community. It was always about the people. It was always about, fitness. One of the things I love with boxing is it's the sport that you do by yourself with other people. I see it similar to like yoga in a way, where, you really thrive off of like other people's energy while you're really trying to like be on your own path.
I'm sitting here today as myself. I'm a transgender man. And for me, I like to be open about my gender history. It's something I'm proud of. It's the work that I do. But for many transgender people, just being themselves is the end goal. And it's not educating, and it's not coming out in public. Because the other thing that gets confused a lot of the time, even within the LGBTQ community, is that coming out as transgender is very different than coming out as LGB. Again, I'm sitting here as I am. I would be sitting here as I am regardless of whether I shared my gender history or not. It's just that I'm sharing it so people know a little more about me and my past. But that is something that's up to each individual person to decide how they feel best to show up in the world. So I think that's also another, just complicated, nuanced factor about the differences within our community, and acknowledging that there are different ways of how to be and how to show pride, because that can also be a very different expression.
Right. And I want to say, as we get into conversation, I know, and everyone should be aware that, one, you don't represent GLAAD, entirely, that some of these things that you're saying are your own opinion. And I assume that you will make that distinction for folks, so there's no confusion about that. And two is, you don't represent the transgender community, because no one person represents any one community. Right. So I don't want that to be confused by people either, because that's a problem for people too, right? Because they think, oh, you're transgender, what's that experience? And then your experience becomes the end-all be-all for them to understand who transgender folks are, and that's not true. You're Alex, and that's all you are, and that's a wonderful thing, but you're not every transgender person.
I think that's such an important distinction to make. And as you said, you're right. I'm here as Alex. I work at GLAAD. When I talk about what GLAAD is and the work that we do, I'm speaking about GLAAD's work. I also have opinions of my own, but when I'm in the workplace and I'm doing that work, I'm coming from a different place of looking through all these filters and layers to make sure that, again, the stories that are being shaped and shared in culture are not just being shared and shaped by one person. We've really, to what you said, no one person should represent an entire community. That burden is too high. The goal of representation is to have enough that you can have differences and have those people be different and accepted, and those experiences be validated. That's the goal. And to what you started out the Power Hour discussing with Rachel, representation is also having people in different positions of leadership and different occupations and having different ideas and speaking differently, and having those people so that those who are younger than both of us can look and say, oh, you know what? I really want to be on the front lines as a healthcare worker. Or, there's someone I follow on Instagram who's a manager at a Haagen-Dazs, which we discussed before, and I love watching him. He's a trans man who's a manager at a Haagen-Dazs. And I think to myself, wouldn't I have loved to see someone just being themselves and loving what they do? And I think that's the power of representation. So it's not just on the screen. It's not just one person carrying that torch. It's being able to see a constellation of people so that you can find yourself in the different bits of them in whatever and whoever you'll become.
An introspection, I think it's good for us to read about that history and to study that history, because I think there are a lot of lessons in that and things for me, frankly, I think about what they went through and can't even imagine, just what it must have been like to be transgender or gay or bisexual in the 1950s and 60s. And yet these folks led a movement where, last year we were all for those of us who are fortunate enough to go to New York City and celebrate in the streets. And I personally got exceedingly emotional when we walked by the Stonewall Inn itself, that President Obama made the park there a national monument, the first LGBTQ national monument. But to me, it really hit me because it was like, my goodness, it's been 50 years since that night. And, so many of those folks, unfortunately passed natural. And then, of course, terribly many we lost to AIDS in the 80s. And just to think, like, if they could see us now, and I personally, in my belief, think they are seeing us and we are a reflection of them and that joy. And I'm so proud of that. And it also inspires me for what's to come.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here at Virtual Pride. My name is Apollo Flowerchild. I am a trans musician from New York City. And my pronouns are they, them, or my name. And I'm going to be singing a song for you. This is an original song. It's called No One Gets Us. I hope you enjoy it. And I travel with you just about anywhere. Adrift a raft we build with our own loving hands, laughing and crying down a lazy stream, splitting ginger ale cans. And I know the world still wouldn't understand. And I don't care who knows or who doesn't, but I want to make sure I'm loving you. And if I never fall in love again, I'd be happy the last lover was you. And no one gets us or what we do. And no I share with you.
Hey y'all, my name is Chris and I'm recording this video to share my coming out story. So I was brought up in a really small conservative town in New York, and throughout high school never fully felt like I fit in or even knew what I identified as. I hung out a lot with other people who were more gender fluid and either gay, lesbian, but I didn't know at that time even what transgender meant, nor had I known anybody who identified as transgender. And honestly, I thought that it was something only people who were born in a male body could do, transition to being a female, and I didn't realize that there was even an option to go the other way. So I lived my life as a female, which is what society told me I should be, and I tried to play the role. Even at that time, I was afraid to date women because I didn't want to be seen as a lesbian because it made me feel more female in a way. So I just kept it inside for years, and I served in the military under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And fortunately, I found a lot of really accepting friends within the LGBTQ plus community that I could rely on and be myself around, even though I was still very much in the closet and having been brought up in a conservative household, never really encouraged to express myself. So I dealt with a lot of depression when I was younger. From the earliest age I could think, I was self-harming and cutting myself, and lo and behold, no one could understand why a seemingly, young person with a relatively, successful potential was hurting themselves. And I was, in and out of mental hospitals for my own safety when I was younger. But throughout, talking therapy and medications, I never found any treatment that could help, any treatment that did help. So I just continued to live. I continued to not be happy and not understand why. Never even knowing that there was an option for me to discover my own freedom and to live as my authentic self, which didn't happen until I was 36. I got this corporate job that I loved, and having to fit into that space, whereas prior I was either, in the military or living in an artist's sort of lifestyle. I'm going to art school, living with other artists, being in the artist community. I felt always more accepted in those spaces than I had once I found this corporate job where men looked a very certain way and women looked a very certain way, and the two shall not, cross paths. I did, early on in my employment, and I'm currently still with this company, so I do very much value my position and the inclusivity that they've shown. They're expressing the desire to learn more about the LGBTQ plus community, and also what transgender means and what non-binary means and what gender fluidity is, different than sexuality. So when I did come out back in 2017, it seemed like the world was going to end for me, because I had previously lived this really life of sadness and solitude. And I got to the point where I just didn't think that I could pretend another day, and regardless of whether or not I was going to lose my friends or family or coworkers or job or housing, it just was time. It just was the right time for me. And I am so grateful that I had made that decision to, continue on and come out the next day rather than, potentially ending my life. So it was scary. It was exhilarating. And I've been surprised. I think I hear a lot is, the non-binary folks and gender non-conforming folks sometimes, or don't often, feel like they're valid, or they're not trans enough or included in the community. And I want to let you know that you definitely are, and everybody is special and everybody is unique in their own journey, and there's never a set destination for your own unique journey. So just be you. It was really a great and powerful thing to be able to have come out, and although it has been challenging, it's been the most powerful decision I've made in my life, and I truly want to support anybody else who's going through this, or who's questioning, or who's struggling, because you're valid and your journey is important. So you find yourself, and I love you. All right, I'll talk to y'all. Take care.
How does that journey progress for you? How do you evolve into realizing who you were, who you've always been?
Yeah, I think that sort of happened outside of athletics, and it was really in part due to the support of my partner, who said, something's going on with your gender, and I think that maybe you should spend some time thinking about it, which was the most gentle, supportive way that anyone could have said, I think I know what's going on, but you have to figure it out for yourself, right? She led me to books and to movies and YouTube videos and all sorts of resources to really just kind of dive in and see if anything resonated for me. And some of it did, some of it absolutely did not. And as I started to put the pieces together and kind of, understand my identity a little more and to put language to my identity. So I think, I always felt like myself, I always knew about myself, but I didn't have the words to describe that to other people. And that was really what the problem came in, was not so much how I felt about myself, but how other people reflected that back to me in the world. And that was the hardest part for me, was navigating the world every day and having people call me she, when that word didn't really fit for me, but I didn't know it was an option for me to use any other pronoun. So putting those pieces together, and then the way that was sort of amplified through sport was, my growing discomfort of using a women's locker room, being in a women's swimsuit at the pool and training for swimming, being at the starting line with women when I was lining up to race. And so, it sort of supported the feelings that I had about myself in this really powerful way, because sport was the most important outside thing for me. And, I needed to figure out how I could be my authentic self and continue to play the sports that I love.
Now, of course, you might ask, like, well, what is that one thing? And the answer is, I don't know how to name it. The only way I had to name it was to write the book. That there was something about language, about embodiment, about empowerment as somebody who is told to be one thing or another thing, about resisting certain kinds of narratives, about being a target, about being illegible, unreadable in some way to the cis hetero white supremacist world, as a mixed race person. There's something about this story that is very much about, on the one hand, existing beyond language and trying to build a life in some way beyond language. And there's also something that is about the search for sacredness, that is about trying to locate and experience or access the divine in oneself as a person who is doing that. And there is something in this book about how those two things are actually the same thing. Even the title, The 30 Names of Night, came out of a sort of epic Sufi poem called The Conference of the Birds, that is about the search for the divine. And a lot of people will already know this, but that the story is essentially that this large group of birds gathers to choose their king. And they decide they're going to seek out this legendary bird, the simurgh, that is sort of a figure sort of like the phoenix, you could imagine, or the roc in Arab traditional storytelling. And they go to seek out the simurgh, and in the end, most of the birds give up. And in the end, when they reach the simurgh, there's only 30 birds left. And you realize that in Persian, 30 birds is actually what simurgh means. And so the simurgh, which is this sort of representation of the divine, is actually a reflection of the seekers. And I think in some way, the whole of this book is actually trying to get at that as a person who is rejected as unreadable or illegible by the society in which they live, and told explicitly that we are not allowed to access or reflect the divine or the sacred in our personhood, in our embodiment, in our lives, in our loving of each other, or friendship or anything. Where does the path lie in seeking that? How do we even go about doing that? And so I think there are all of these disparate threads in the book, but they all come back in a way to that, to say it is possible to build a life outside of this legibility. It is possible to find the divine in oneself as a trans person, as a mixed race person, but more specifically as a person who is not legible in a way that's acceptable to the world around you.
And I totally agree with you. I also knew a formation or know of a formation in Oakland who are doing the People's Free Breakfast program as well. And I just think about the importance of us figuring out those ways to organize in our communities, right? In whatever little way that you can. Activism and organizing isn't just direct action in a particular way. It isn't just being out in the streets with bullhorns, although that is beautiful and effective, and we've seen change through those ways. But we've got to figure out how to get people to understand that organizing is figuring out what little bit you can bite off in your own life with your own skills and know-how. And so I think about, people who have access to churches, right? How can you use that to organize to get food to people or organize to get healthcare to folks? I think about, when people are back in their kind of traditional physical workplaces, how are you organizing to make sure that everyone is getting the benefits that they need to survive, particularly on the medical tip? And then I think about schools, all of these different institutions. There are ways for us to rally around and support people who are not being supported in the ways that they need to be supported. And so I think about those little bits that we can all kind of figure out how to chew off in our own lives. Because we all have skills, we all have some knowledge to pull on to make things better. And I love, even though this is a difficult time, I love that people are doing that visioning work again around the ways that they can support each other. A lot of the mutual aid programs have propped up in the last month or so, and folks are really kind of rallying together in beautiful, beautiful ways. And for me, what's always close to my heart is how particularly Black trans folks are organizing, right? We are in a demographic of folks that people kind of throw away as, victims who are just waiting to be saved. And that's not actually true. We have a rich history of organizing and being powerful with what we do have. And I think about groups like the Okra Project here in New York that are getting food and resources to Black and brown trans folks in the New York, New Jersey, and Philly area. I think about a group called For the Girls that came out recently. They were doing a lot of parties last week to raise money for folks, but they actually shifted their efforts to raise money to support trans folks who had medical fees, right? Because people are still trying to recover from medical fees that they had before COVID was happening everywhere. And so I think about those things and how people with seemingly so little are living in abundance. And I really think that that's the kind of example a lot of us need to be looking to.
A couple of years ago, I put a trans pride flag on my house, nice big flag. My house is on a corner here in DC, and so it's a very prominent intersection. And at a block party, a few months later, one of my neighbors came up to me and mentioned to me that their son, who was still in high school, had recently transitioned from female to male. Was I aware of that? No, I did not. And this is a neighbor I had known for years, but I did not realize this. And then he went on to tell me that when you put up that flag, my son ran home that day. He saw that flag. He ran home that day. He's like, Dad, there's a trans pride flag on that house over there on the corner. And the father's like, yeah, that's Monica's house. You should go talk to her. She's really nice. And he said to me, he saw that flag and it made him happy. It made him realize, and it made him understand that he really is not alone. That he's just, it just makes him happy. And he sees it every day when he comes home from school. He walks by it. So, thank you. And just having a father say thank you just for the act of putting up a flag. I mean, I'm tearing up now just for thinking about it. So, it's very important because little acts like that make all the difference to the youth.
They really do. It cannot be stated enough. You should tell that story every day, twice a day, for good measure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that collection of stories. Uplifting, moving. I know I did. I've been, sitting right along here with you for the last hour, watching all these wonderful people and watching again, in some cases, all these wonderful people that we've gotten to know through the center. So I just want to say thanks to everyone for being here. Hope you keep coming back. Once again, I'm Erin Worrell. I'm the board president of the Bayard Rustin Center. And kick it back over to Rob for some last words and thoughts.
Again, Erin, we are so honored by you being with us and part of our journey, and all the folks that you saw tonight who came out to the Power Hour, and just letting folks know that we are here every weeknight, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific for virtual communion, and I hope you'll come back. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your night. Until soon, much love and respect. Be good to each other. Be good to your families, chosen or otherwise. And most especially, and Erin and I both don't practice this enough personally, but we do preach it. Be good to yourselves. You need it, and we need you here with us. Until tomorrow, my friends.
We need in every community a group of angelic troublemakers.